I've covered a lot of stories in my 12 years, working for the United Earth Diplomatic Corps Field Correspondence Division. I've watched human soldiers hold a ceasefire line with nothing but their own silence and nerve. I've seen Earth negotiators sit across from creatures that could rip them in half and not flinch once. Not once, because that's just the kind of thing we produce. I've written about engineers who kept fusion cores from overloading using stripped wire techniques they invented on the spot. I've documented first contacts that should have ended in violence and didn't, because some stubborn human with no tactical authority and no backup just refused to let it go sideways. But I've never written anything like this. This one started with a girl. Not a human girl, an alien girl, maybe 12 years old in local biological reckoning, thin in a way that went past lean, past hungry, all the way into something that made your chest ache just to look at her. Standing in the service corridor off Cathara Station's commercial deck with her back against a coolant pipe that leaked steam every 3 minutes like clockwork, and she was shaking. Not from the steam. The steam was warm. She was shaking because she was frightened, and because she was desperate, and because she'd made the kind of decision that only desperate people make. The kind where you know the odds are bad but you're out of options. She walked up to a man. Just a man, sitting on a cargo crate eating lunch from a foil packet, worn jacket, beat-up boots. Scars on his hands from work, not war. Or maybe both, it's hard to tell with some people. She looked up at him. And she said something. What she said changed things on Cathara Station in a way that nobody expected. Section 2, Setup. Let me give you some context, because context matters here. Cathara Station sits at the junction of 3 trade corridors in what the Galactic Union officially calls the Outer Rim Mediation Zone, which is a fancy name for a part of space where nobody can quite agree on who owns what and everyone's too tired to fight about it anymore. The station itself is enormous, not by Earth standards, where we tend to build things compact and utilitarian, but by galactic standards, which tend toward either brutalist enormity or crystalline showmanship, depending on which species did the construction. Cathara was built by a consortium of 4 species and looks it. 1/4 of the station is all sweeping organic curves and bioluminescent paneling. 1/4 is raw mineral block, rough cut and functional. 1/4 looks like someone assembled it from salvaged ship hulls, because they literally did. And 1/4, the Earth quarter, built 22 years ago when humans were finally granted provisional membership in the Outer Trade Network, is that particular brand of human architecture that drives other species slightly crazy. Efficient, modular, aggressively practical, and somehow, inexplicably, everywhere decorated with plants. 30,000 people live and work on Cathara Station permanently. Another 40,000 pass through in any given month. Of those 40,000, maybe 12,000 are human. The rest are a spread so diverse it would take me 100 pages just to list the species, let alone explain the politics. You've got your Vethori merchant clans, moving in tight family groups and trading in everything from rare minerals to organic biodata. You've got Krellian engineers who hired themselves out to basically every major installation in the Outer Rim, and are now contractually embedded into the fabric of the station itself. You've got scorned military observers, and when I say observers, I mean it loosely, because the scorn don't really observe so much as they occupy space and make everyone around them aware of how easily they could become a problem. Then you've got the Keth. The Keth are, and I want to be precise here because they're important to this story, a species that most galactic entities regard with a kind of complicated pity. They're bipedal, roughly humanoid in the sense that they have 2 arms and 2 legs and a head in the expected configuration, but the resemblance ends there. Their skin has this quality that shifts between a pale silver gray and a deeper blue-gray depending on their emotional state and temperature. Their eyes are large and set wide, adapted for very low light, giving them this permanent expression that most humans initially read as sadness or fear. They have almost no body mass by default. The Keth homeworld, Kethis, was a cold planet with very little arable land. Most of their evolutionary history was shaped by scarcity, by making do with almost nothing, by finding nutrients in places other species wouldn't think to look. Kethis is gone now. It was gone before my grandmother was born. A resource extraction conflict, the specifics are documented elsewhere and I won't rehash them here, reduced the planet to an uninhabitable extraction site 90 years ago. The Keth people, what remained of them, scattered across the trade corridors as refugees. Some found patronage with sympathetic systems. Most found nothing. They are, in the blunt language of galactic economics, a displaced people with no territorial leverage and no industrial value, which means they have no bargaining power and no protection under any treaty framework that actually carries enforcement teeth. On Kethara Station, the Keth exist in the margins. Not metaphorically, literally. They occupy the service corridors, the maintenance levels, the sections of the station that the official directories don't list. They do the work that nobody else wants to do: waste processing, coolant maintenance, atmospheric scrubbing, the kind of deep station labor that keeps a place like Kethara functional but invisible. They get paid in station credits that barely cover food ration access, and the food ration access is controlled by the supply distribution network, which is, and this is the part that matters, controlled by the Vethori merchant clans who have a commercial agreement with the station administration that no one in the lower tiers of the station had any part in negotiating. There's a name for this kind of arrangement in human economic history. We've had about 100 different names for it, actually. None of them were good ones. Section 3, the station that morning. The morning this happened, and when I say morning, I mean the artificial lighting cycle that Kethara Station runs on a 26-hour standard, since there's no actual sun to worry about, started like most mornings on the commercial deck. The commercial deck is level 7, the station's main public-facing trade floor. It's loud. It smells like 6 different kinds of food cooking at once, overlaid with recycled air and the faint metallic tang that comes from the atmospheric processors working overtime. The deck runs about 2 kilometers from one end to the other, lined with vendor stalls, service counters, import-export offices, and the kind of informal markets that spring up wherever you have enough people with enough goods and enough need. Human presence on level 7 was significant that day because a transit convoy had arrived the night before, 3 Earth-flagged cargo haulers running a supply route between the inner systems and the outer rim. The crews had docked, filed their paperwork, and then done what cargo haulers always do when they make port: found somewhere to eat, found somewhere to sleep, and then wandered around looking for something to do with their off hours. Most of them ended up on level 7. That's how Marcus Vale ended up on a cargo crate near the service corridor junction at C14, with a foil packet lunch, and nowhere particular to be for another 4 hours. Marcus Vale. I should describe him because he's the center of this whole thing, and I've found that people imagine someone different from who he actually was. He was 43 years old, medium height, medium build, with the kind of physical presence that doesn't announce itself. He wasn't imposing. He wasn't particularly striking. He was just solid in the way that people get when they've spent most of their adult life doing physical work in conditions that don't care whether you're comfortable. He'd been running cargo on outer corridor routes for 11 years. Before that, he'd spent 7 years in the Earth Defense Auxiliary, which is the branch of Earth's military structure that deals with installations and infrastructure rather than direct conflict. His record there was, by his own description, unremarkable. He fixed things. He maintained things. He occasionally helped defend things. He left when his contract expired and went to work freight because it paid better and nobody shot at you. He had the kind of face that had clearly smiled a lot over the course of its life, even if it wasn't smiling right now. He was eating. He was watching the foot traffic on level 7 with the particular expression of someone who finds people interesting without needing anything from them. He had a cup of something hot, real coffee, genuine Earth import coffee, the kind you only splurge on when you've just made a good run, sitting on the crate next to him. He wasn't looking for trouble. He wasn't looking for anything. He was just there. Section 4, the girl. Her name in anglicized translation was something close to Sari. That's what I'll call her, Sari. She was 11 years old in local biological reckoning, which among the Keth is roughly equivalent to about 9 or 10 in human developmental terms. She'd been living on Kethara Station her entire life, born in one of the maintenance-level clusters, where the Keth community had established something resembling a home over the course of decades. Her mother had died 2 years before this incident, respiratory complications from prolonged exposure to the atmospheric scrubbing compounds used in the maintenance shafts, a condition that Kethara Station's medical administration had classified as a pre-existing species susceptibility rather than an occupational hazard, which meant no compensation and no support. Her sister's name was Yali. Yali was 7 years old. And Yali was sick. Not sick the way you get sick when you catch something. Sick the way you get sick when your body has been running on insufficient nutrition for a period of time that it simply cannot sustain. Sick the way poverty makes you sick when there's no floor under you and no one whose job it is to catch you when you fall. Sari had been trying to get food from the station ration distribution point for 3 days. 3 days. Every time she went, there was a problem. The first day, she was told her family's ration card had been flagged for review, a standard administrative hold that could take up to 2 weeks to resolve. The second day, she was told the distribution point for her residential sector was temporarily closed for inventory assessment. The third day, the morning this happened, she was told, without particular cruelty but without any apparent concern either, that the Keth residential sector's collective ration account had a deficiency balance that needed to be cleared before individual distributions could resume. A deficiency balance, meaning someone in the administrative chain had miscalculated or misapplied a fee, or simply decided that the numbers looked better if the Keth account showed a deficit, because nobody was going to audit the Keth accounts too carefully. Sari stood at the distribution counter for 40 minutes that morning before one of the Vethori administrators finally told her to move along. She had nothing to pay the deficiency. She had nobody to appeal to. She had, as far as she understood it, no options left. So she went up to level 7. Not to beg, or not exactly. She'd thought about it for a long time before she went. She'd talked herself out of it twice and talked herself back into it once. And then the image of Yali's face that morning, pale silver gray with the blue deepening around her eyes in that way that meant she was cold and weak, had pushed Sari past the point where pride mattered more than outcome. She was going to find someone who might help. She walked the length of level 7 3 times, trying to figure out who to ask. Not the Vethori merchants, she knew better. Not the Scorn, she wasn't that desperate. She thought briefly about the Krellian engineers because they were known to be fair-minded, but she didn't speak any of the Krellian trade dialects, and she wasn't sure her translator chip could handle the nuance. Then she saw the human, sitting on his crate, eating his lunch, looking at nothing in particular with those eyes that seemed, to Sari, like they were actually seeing things rather than just processing them. She knew about humans in the way that someone who's grown up in the margins of a station knows about the major groups that move through it, from a distance, from observation, from the things adults said. She knew humans were newer to the outer corridors and still figuring out how to fit in, which meant the established powers didn't quite have them categorized yet. She knew some humans were generous and some weren't, just like everyone else. She knew humans had a reputation for reacting unpredictably in emotional situations. Some species found this alarming, but to Sari's young mind, unpredictable meant variable, and variable meant there was a chance. She walked up to him. She stopped about 2 meters away, which was the polite distance among the Keth when approaching a stranger. She said, and I'm translating from the Keth standard hybrid her community used, through the station's translation matrix, she said. Please feed my sister, I'll serve you. Whatever you need done, I'll do it. Just please feed my sister. Marcus Vale stopped chewing. He looked at her. And this is the moment that everyone who watched the surveillance footage later, and believe me, once this story got out, a lot of people watched that footage. This is the moment where you can see exactly what kind of person he was, because his face didn't go through any complicated calculation. He didn't look surprised or put upon or annoyed at the interruption. He didn't immediately start looking around to see if this was some kind of setup. He just looked at her. And then he set his lunch down. Section 5, the conversation. What's wrong with your sister? He said. Sari blinked. That wasn't the response she'd planned for. She'd planned for suspicion or dismissal or demands for clarification about what she was offering. She hadn't planned for the direct question. She's sick, Sari said. She hasn't eaten properly in 5 days. How old is she? 7. Marcus was quiet for a second. What happened to your food access? Sari explained. She was matter-of-fact about it because she'd been living with the facts, and the facts were what they were. The ration hold, the closed distribution point, the deficiency balance that wasn't her family's error and that she had no way to clear. She laid it out simply, the way kids sometimes do when they're past the stage of hoping the situation is fixable and just reporting what it is. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Okay, take me to your sister." Sari stared at him. "What?" she said. "Take me to your sister. I need to see how bad it is. Then we figure out food." "I said I'd serve you," Sari said, and she said it with a kind of careful dignity that made something tighten in Marcus's chest. "Whatever you need." "I heard you," Marcus said. He stood up, picking up his coffee cup. "And here's what I need. I need you to take me to your sister so we can get her food. That's the job. Can you do that?" Sari was 11 years old and had been living in the margins of a station run by people who treated her community as a resource to be managed. She had not, in her recent experience, encountered the particular register of adult voice that Marcus was using, the one that wasn't performing kindness for an audience, wasn't calculating what she could do for him, wasn't looking for an angle. She thought he might be deceiving her. She decided it didn't matter, because Yali needed to eat. "Follow me," she said. Section 6, the maintenance levels. I should explain that getting from level 7 to the Keth residential clusters on maintenance level 14 is not a simple walk. The official station directories list level 14 as atmospheric processing infrastructure, restricted access. The Keth community that had been living there for 30+ years wasn't listed at all. To get there, you had to know which service corridors to take, which elevator shafts had been unofficially opened up, and which security nodes had been quietly looped to stop flagging Keth residents every time they moved through. Marcus followed Sari through a series of corridors that got progressively narrower and progressively less finished looking. The commercial deck's careful upkeep faded by level 9. By level 11, they were walking past exposed conduit runs and unfinished wall panels. By level 13, the lighting was entirely utilitarian, nothing but functional strips every 3 meters, casting flat shadows and making everything look like the inside of a machine, which it essentially was. He didn't ask where they were going or how far it was. He didn't make comments about the conditions. He did notice things. She caught him scanning the infrastructure with the systematic attention of someone who knew what he was looking at, but he didn't say anything about it. Just kept pace with her, coffee cup still in hand, apparently in no particular hurry. At one point, they passed 3 older Keth men who were running a maintenance check on a coolant coupling. They stopped and looked at Marcus with the kind of expression that's mostly wariness with just a thread of something more protective underneath. Sari said something to them in fast Keth standard that the translation chip rendered imperfectly as "It's all right. I know what I'm doing." The oldest of the 3 looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him. There was a beat of assessment that didn't need language. "She's taking me to her sister," Marcus said. "Just that." Something in the old Keth man's posture shifted slightly. Not trust exactly, not yet, but acknowledgement. He stepped aside. They continued down. Section 7 HFY. The Keth residential cluster on level 14 occupied a section of the station that had originally been designed as equipment storage bays. Over 30 years, the community had transformed it into something that functioned as a neighborhood in the ways that mattered: common spaces, individual family units partitioned with materials salvaged from all over the station, a small communal kitchen area, even what looked like a school space for children, marked out with color-coded panels and small furniture scaled to Keth proportions. It wasn't safe. By any standard, Marcus would have held a residential space too. The atmospheric management was improvised. The structural integrity of some of the partitions was a guess. The power supply was tapped from auxiliary feeds that probably weren't rated for residential draw. But it was theirs, and they'd made it work for 3 decades because nobody in the official station administration had cared enough to either help them or move them. Yali was in a small family unit near the far end of the cluster. She was lying on a sleeping pad, covered with a thin material, and when Sari pushed open the partition and said her name softly, she opened her eyes. She was so thin. I wasn't there for this part. I'm reconstructing from Sari's testimony, but she described Marcus's face when he saw Yali, and she said it went very still. Not distant. Still. The way things go still when someone is taking something in and making sure they don't miss any of it. He crouched down to Yali's level. "Hi," he said. "I'm Marcus. Your sister brought me." Yali looked at him with those wide Keth eyes, dark-rimmed with the blue that meant cold and weakness. She didn't say anything. She was too tired. Marcus reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a ration bar, the kind that cargo crews carry as backup provisions, compact and calorie-dense, designed to maintain basic function in emergency situations. He broke off a small piece. "This is going to taste strange to you," he said, "but it won't hurt you and it'll help your body while we get you something better. Can I give you this?" He held it out and waited. Yali looked at it, then she looked at Sari, who nodded. She took it. Marcus sat back on his heels. He turned to Sari. "How many people are in this cluster?" Sari blinked. "In our cluster." "How many total?" "All the Keth on level 14. She thought about it. "About 200, maybe 220. "How many are in your situation right now?" "No ration access." Sari was quiet for a moment. "Most of us," she said. "The deficiency balance is for the whole sector account. It's not just us." Marcus was quiet, then he said, "Okay." He pulled out his comm unit. Section 8, the calls. He made 3 calls. The first was to his ship, specifically to his cargo manifest officer, a woman named Doria Chan who had, in Marcus's words later, the organizational capacity of a military supply depot and absolutely zero patience for bureaucratic nonsense. He told her what he'd found. He told her what he needed. He gave her the number 220, and then he said something that I've since asked him to repeat for me because I wanted to get it right. He said, "We're a supply ship, Doria. What are we carrying?" Doria told him. "Good," he said. "How much of it can we pull without affecting the commercial delivery?" She told him that too. "Then pull it," he said. I'll sort the paperwork with Captain Reyes. Second call, Captain Leanna Reyes, his actual captain who commanded the cargo hauler Harmon's Bridge. I spoke with Captain Reyes later and she told me the conversation lasted about 90 seconds. Marcus explained the situation. She said, and I'm quoting directly from her because she agreed to be quoted, "Marcus, you've been with my crew for 6 years. You've never once asked me for anything for yourself. If you're asking for this, I'm not going to be the one who says no." Third call, this is the one I want you to pay attention to. He called the Cathara station, Ration Distribution Administration. He got through to a mid-level administrator named, I'm using the anglicized version, Prathan, of the Vethori Merchant Clan Oversight Board. He explained that he was a registered freight contractor currently docked at Cathara Station. He explained that he was in possession of a commercial goods manifest, and he wished to make a direct humanitarian allocation to registered station residents. He cited, and this is where it gets interesting, he cited the Outer Rim Mediation Zone Humanitarian Provision Act, which is a treaty article that humans had been instrumental in drafting 8 years ago as part of their Galactic Union provisional membership negotiations. An article that technically allowed any registered commercial entity to make direct humanitarian allocations to stateless or displaced residents of mediation zone stations, bypassing normal distribution channels, provided the allocation was documented and the entity accepted liability for any regulatory complications. Prathan told him that was not standard procedure. Marcus told him he was aware of that. Prathan told him the station administration would need to review any such allocation request. Marcus told him he understood and that the review was welcome, and that in the meantime he was going to be moving food from his ship to level 14, and he wanted to make sure Prathan had the documentation he needed for his records. He gave Prathan his contractor registration number, his ship's docking authorization, his cargo manifest number, and the specific article number of the Humanitarian Provision Act he was citing. He then told Prathan to have a good day and ended the call. Sari had been watching all of this. "What did you just do?" she said. Marcus stood up. "I told them what I was going to do so they couldn't later claim it was unauthorized. It's a paper thing. Humans are good at paper." He looked down at Yali, who had fallen asleep again but with slightly more color in her face than before, or maybe Sari was just hoping that. "The food will take about 2 hours to get here. I'm going to stay until it arrives. Is that all right?" "You don't have to stay," Sari said, but she said it in a way that was not actually asking him to leave. "I know," Marcus said. He settled onto the floor with his back against the partition wall. He still had his coffee cup. He looked at it, found it was empty, and set it down. "Tell me about your sister. What does she like?" Sari stared at him. "What does she like?" she repeated. "Yeah, what does she like to do? What makes her laugh?" Sari didn't know what to do with this question for a long moment. Then slowly, she sat down on the floor across from him. "She likes making things," Sari said. "She finds pieces of things in the maintenance shafts and she builds models of ships. She's never seen a real ship, but she knows what they look like because someone gave her a picture catalog and she's memorized it." "How accurate are the models?" "Very," Sari said, with the particular pride of an older sibling. "The older crew people say she gets things right that they didn't know were right until they saw them." "Huh," Marcus said. He seemed genuinely interested. "She ever build an Earth-type hauler, a Class 7? "I don't know, maybe. I'd have to look." "If she hasn't, she should. They're ugly ships, but they're interesting ugly." Sari looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" she said. Marcus considered the question. He didn't dismiss it or deflect it, which she'd been half expecting. "Your sister needed food," he said. "I had food. The math isn't complicated." But this Sari stopped, tried again. "Most people would say it's not their problem." Most people would probably say a lot of things, Marcus said. I'm not most people, and also, he paused. I've been in situations where someone could have helped and didn't. I remember what that felt like. He looked at her steadily. I don't want to be the person who made someone feel that. Section 9, the 2 hours. Those 2 hours are worth documenting because of what happened during them. Marcus sat on that floor and he talked with Sari, and Sari talked back, and then other residents of the cluster started appearing in the doorway to the family unit, drawn by word that something was happening, that a human was here, that food had been promised. They came cautiously, the way people come when they've been let down enough times that hope itself has become a risk. Marcus talked to all of them. He wasn't performative about it. He didn't make speeches. He answered questions when people asked him questions. He asked questions of his own, practical ones, mostly about the conditions they were living in, the specific problems with the atmospheric management, the structural concerns with certain sections of the cluster. He was taking inventory in that systematic way of his, and several of the older Keth residents who had worked maintenance roles for years found themselves talking with him in the specific language of infrastructure, comparing notes on what was holding and what wasn't. An older Keth woman named, in anglicization, something close to Mathen. She'd been maintaining the cluster's improvised atmospheric system for 8 years, sat with him for 40 minutes going through the specifics of their power draw and their filtration capacity. She said later that she'd never had a conversation like that with anyone from the station's upper levels, never mind a visitor. Most people, she said, either didn't look at the infrastructure at all or looked at it with the expression of someone who was going to file a report. Marcus looked at it like someone who was going to fix it. He made notes. At one point, one of the scorned military observers, there were 2 assigned to Level 7 as part of the station's routine security presence, appeared at the entrance to the maintenance corridor that led to Level 14. I don't know how they found out Marcus was down there. Maybe Prathan made a call. Maybe it was just routine patrol sweep. The scorned observer, his registered designation was Tactical Officer Vroon. He was large in the way that scorn always are, with the dense, overlapping bone plate structure across his shoulders that makes them look like they're wearing armor when they're just standing in their skin. He had the full tactical load-bearing kit that scorn observers wore on station patrol. He looked down the corridor at Marcus, with the expression that senior species military types get when they've found a junior species civilian doing something they haven't cleared. He said, "Human, what is your purpose in this sector?" Marcus looked up at him without particular alarm. "Humanitarian allocation under ORMZ Article 14C, Marcus said. Registered commercial contractor, documented with station administration. You want the manifest number." Vroon looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked around at the assembled Keth residents, at Yali sleeping on her pad, at Sari sitting next to her sister with her hand resting on Yali's thin arm. "This sector is not designated residential," Vroon said. "The people living here didn't get to designate it," Marcus said. "Their homeworld isn't available." Another long moment. "The allocation will be reviewed," Vroon said. "I know," Marcus said. "I documented it, all of it, including this conversation." He tapped his comm unit, which had been running a record. "If you'd like to make a statement for the record, tactical officer, you're welcome to." I have watched the surveillance footage of this moment about a dozen times. The thing that gets me is not that Marcus was brave, though he was, in a careful, prepared kind of way, it's that he was boring about it. He wasn't challenging Vroon, wasn't performing defiance. He was just moving through the administrative reality of the situation as if Vroon's authority was one factor among several, not an absolute wall. Vroon didn't leave, but he didn't interfere. He stood at the corridor entrance and he watched. 2 hours after Marcus's calls, Doria Chan arrived. Section 10, the delivery. Doria Chan was 41 years old, built like someone who'd spent most of her life in zero-G cargo environments and had the upper body density to prove it. She had about the same amount of outward warmth as a pressure seal and the same reliability, which is to say total. She arrived with 4 other crew members from Harmon's Bridge, all of them pushing repulsor carts loaded with supply containers. She stopped when she saw Vroon at the corridor entrance. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has neither the time nor the inclination for obstacles. "Registered humanitarian allocation," she said without being asked. "Documentation is filed. You can scan the cargo." Vroon scanned it. It cleared. Doria moved past him like he was a piece of furniture. What she'd brought, and I want to be specific because the specificity matters, was enough food to last approximately 220 people 2 weeks. Not luxury rations, not symbolic gesture food. Actual substantive provisions, calorie-dense staples, protein supplements formulated to be compatible with multiple species' digestive systems, water purification compounds, vitamin supplements. The kind of cargo that cargo haulers carry in reserve quantities for exactly the kind of extended mission uncertainty that outer corridor runs produce. She also brought, and this was Marcus's addition to the manifest, filed in the 2 hours while he sat on the floor of Yali's family unit, a portable medical scanner, and a full-spectrum metabolic supplement kit designed for malnourishment recovery. She handed the scanner to Marcus, who handed it to Mathen, who had, it turned out, basic medical training from her years maintaining the cluster's improvised health station. Mathen scanned Yali. She looked at the results for a moment without expression. Then she looked at Marcus. "She needs 3 days of supplement loading and then careful reintroduction of solids," Mathen said. "She's further along than she looks. Can you manage that?" "I've managed worse with less," Mathen said. "It wasn't a complaint. It was just a statement of fact about her life." "You don't have to manage with less this time," Marcus said. Mathen looked at him for a moment that was harder to read than most moments I've tried to reconstruct from testimony. Then she looked away and started directing the other residents in the distribution of the supplies. Sari was standing near the wall, watching all of this. At some point, Marcus walked over to her. "The supplement kit and the scanner are yours," he said. "Or your community's, I guess. The documentation records them as a humanitarian medical equipment transfer, which means they're now station-registered community property. Nobody can take them without going through a formal property dispute review." Sari stared at him. "Why does that matter?" "Because it makes it harder for someone to just walk in and remove them," Marcus said. "Paper. Humans are really good at paper." Sari was quiet for a long moment. "Why did you really do this?" she said. "The real reason." Marcus looked at her. He thought about it. You could see him thinking about it, actually taking the question seriously instead of reaching for the easy answer. "When I was about your age," he said, "my family was in a bad situation, different planet, different circumstances, but not having enough. Watching adults try to navigate systems that didn't care whether we made it or not, and a person helped us. Didn't make a big deal out of it, just helped." He paused. "I never got to pay them back, so I guess I'm trying to pay it forward in a direction that needs it." Another pause. "Does that make sense?" Sari thought about it. "It makes sense," she said. "Good." He looked over at Yali, who was awake now, watching the activity in the family unit with wide eyes. "Now, does she have materials here?" "For her models." This is where the story becomes something larger than 2 hours on level 14. Marcus filed his full humanitarian allocation report that afternoon. He filed it through every channel available to him. The standard Cathara station administrative intake, the UEDC field office on the station's upper level. And this is the part nobody expected from a cargo hauler with no particular political background. He filed it through the Outer Rim Mediation Zone Treaty Compliance Board, which was a body that technically had oversight authority over how signatory stations treated displaced species populations, but which had in practice been largely ignored for about 15 years because nobody had bothered to use it for anything. He had done his research in those 2 hours on the floor of Yali's family unit. Humans are, as I may have mentioned, very good at paper. The report landed on the desk of Treaty Compliance Board Representative Sierra John, a human, incidentally, which was not something Marcus had specifically planned for, but was not something he'd failed to notice either. With full documentation of the Keth community's situation, the specific administrative mechanisms by which their ration access had been denied, the deficiency balance discrepancy, and a fairly comprehensive assessment of the structural inadequacy of the residential space on level 14. Representative John called her counterparts on the board within the hour. Captain Reyes, for her part, filed a commercial interest notification with the Kethara Station Port Authority, indicating that Harmon's Bridge intended to establish a regular supply arrangement with the level 14 residential community as a charitable commercial designation, which under Outer Corridor commercial law created a registered relationship that gave the community a degree of standing they hadn't previously had in station legal structure. Doria Chan, because Doria Chan was a person who expressed care through logistics, updated her master cargo manifest to include a standing reserve allocation for the level 14 community on every subsequent Harmon's Bridge run through Kethara Station. And Tactical Officer Vroon, this part genuinely surprised everyone, including, I think, Vroon himself, filed an independent observation report through the Scorn Military Oversight Channel noting that during a routine patrol, he had observed conditions in the level 14 sector that did not meet Scorn military standards for habitation, and that the Scorn observation presence on Kethara Station wished to log a formal concern regarding the welfare of resident populations in unmapped station sectors. Nobody had expected that from Vroon. When I spoke to him later, Scorn military observers rarely give interviews, but he agreed to a brief one, he said, and I'm translating. The human used the systems available to him. We observed. The observation was accurate. A pause. The small one. The younger child. She was not supposed to be sick. She was on a station with sufficient resources. That should not be. It was, for a Scorn military observer, essentially a passionate speech. Section 12. What happened at the hearing? The Treaty Compliance Board convened a formal review hearing on the Keth community's status on Kethara Station, 11 days after Marcus's report landed. Marcus was not supposed to testify. He was a cargo hauler. He had standing as the filing party, but not as an expert witness on anything the board technically needed expert testimony about. He testified anyway, because Representative John asked him to, and because the station's administrative representatives, who arrived for the hearing with 3 legal advisors and a very confident expression that faded progressively as the hearing went on, seemed to believe that a cargo hauler's testimony was the weakest part of the filing. They had miscalculated. Marcus sat in front of the board and he described, with the precise and systematic attention to detail of someone who had spent his 2 hours on level 14 very carefully looking at everything, the exact conditions of the level 14 residential cluster, the atmospheric management, the structural integrity concerns, the power supply situation, the improvised medical station, the school space, the maintenance infrastructure that a woman named Mathen had been holding together for 8 years, with tools that were not designed for the job. He described Yali. He described the deficiency balance discrepancy and the specific dates on which Sari had attempted to access ration distribution and been turned away. He described the Outer Rim Mediation Zone Humanitarian Provision Act and the specific obligations it created for station administrations, toward displaced species populations within their borders. He was not a lawyer. He was not a politician. He was a cargo hauler who'd spent his off hours in the 11 days since the allocation doing research and taking notes. The station's legal advisors tried to characterize the situation as a standard administrative processing delay that had been resolved by the commercial humanitarian allocation. Marcus pointed out that the deficiency balance discrepancy had not been resolved, had not been investigated, and still sat in the station's accounting system as an outstanding obligation against the Keth community account. One of the legal advisors said that the discrepancy was under internal review. Marcus asked when the review had been initiated. The legal advisor said it had been initiated recently. Marcus asked if by recently she meant in the last 11 days, and if so, whether the board might find it significant that the review was initiated after the filing rather than before. The legal advisor did not answer that question directly. The board found it significant. The formal ruling came 6 weeks later. The Keth community on level 14 was granted legal residential recognition as a protected displaced population under ORMZ treaty provisions. The deficiency balance was cleared, and the Vethori Merchant Clan Oversight Board was required to submit to a full audit of their ration distribution practices as they applied to non-contracted station residents. The Level 14 sector was flagged for infrastructure assessment, with the station administration required to bring conditions up to the minimum habitability standard within 90 days or face treaty violation findings. It wasn't everything. It wasn't justice, full, complete, retroactive justice for 30 years of an entire community being invisible. That's not what treaty compliance hearings produce, and I won't pretend otherwise. But it was something. And something in the calculus of displaced people who have been operating in the negative for decades is not nothing. I interviewed Sari 4 months after the incident. By that point, Yali had fully recovered. She was eating. She was building models. She had, it turned out, built a Class 7 cargo hauler from salvaged components about a year before all of this happened. Sari had checked, and it was, according to 3 different Harmon's Bridge crew members who were shown photographs of it, startlingly accurate down to the secondary thruster placement. Marcus had been back through Kethara Station twice since the original incident, both times running cargo runs. Both times he'd come down to level 14, not to check on things, not in a supervisory capacity, just to visit. He brought Yali a proper model building kit the second time, the kind intended for young ship enthusiasts, with precision-measured components and actual schematics. Yali, who had been doing this by intuition, spent approximately 4 minutes looking at the schematics before announcing several things she would have done differently. "She's not wrong," Marcus told me when I relayed this. "About the thruster placement she mentioned, she's not wrong about that." When I interviewed Sari, I asked her what she wanted people to take from this story. She was 11 years old, almost 12 by then. She'd lived her whole life in a space that the station didn't officially acknowledge. She'd watched her mother get sick from work that the station benefited from but wouldn't take responsibility for. She'd spent 3 days trying to navigate an administrative system that was designed, functionally if not explicitly, to produce failure for people like her. She thought about my question for a long time. "I used to think," she said, "that the way things were was the way things had to be, because the people who ran things were the people who got to say what the rules were, and the rules always seemed to come out the same way." She paused. But the rules didn't make Marcus do what he did, and the rules didn't stop him either. He just used the rules that were there, but nobody was using. She looked at me. "There are rules that are supposed to help people like us," she said. "The people who wrote them put them there. I think they meant them, but nobody was using them." A pause. "Marcus used them. I want to be honest about something." I tried to make Marcus veil, into a bigger story than he was. Not unfairly. There was a story there, and it was a good one, and I told it accurately. But I kept looking for the moment where he'd reveal that he'd planned all of this, or that he had a political motivation, or that there was something calculated in what he'd done that would make it make more sense in the context of the galactic stage. There wasn't. He was a cargo hauler who'd seen a kid who needed help. He'd helped. Everything else, the treaty filing, the board hearing, the audit, the residential recognition, that had all come out of the help, not the other way around. He hadn't started with the goal of forcing a station administration's hand on displaced species policy. He'd started with a girl who needed food and a sister who needed medicine, and the question of what he could actually do about it from where he was. The answer had turned out to be quite a lot, actually, if you knew how to use the tools available and weren't going to be impressed by someone telling you it wasn't standard procedure. I asked him once what he thought about how it had escalated. He was quiet for a moment. He had that particular stillness that I'd heard about from Sari's description, but that was even more noticeable in person. The sense that he was processing things carefully rather than just waiting for his turn to talk. I didn't set out to escalate anything, he said. I set out to get a sick kid fed. Everything after that was just filling in the gaps. If there's a rule that's supposed to help someone and it's not being used, you use it. If there's a system that's supposed to ensure accountability and it's not being used, you use it. He shrugged. Humans have been inventing systems to protect vulnerable people for about as long as we've been a civilization. We don't always use them. We're not always good at it, but we know how they work. We built most of them. He thought for another moment. And the thing about that, he said, is that knowing how a system works means you can use it, even when the people running the system are hoping you won't know how. The last interview I did for this piece was with Yali. She was 7 years old. She'd been through a recovery that her body handled better than anyone had expected, which Mathen attributed to the stubbornness characteristic of young Keth who'd grown up in difficult circumstances and had developed a particular determination to persist. I sat with her while she worked on a model. She was building a Vethori trade cruiser from the schematics Marcus had included in the kit, although she'd already made a penciled notation on the schematic where she disagreed with the fuel line routing. I asked her what she remembered about being sick. She didn't look up from the model. I remember being cold, she said, and I remember Sari's face. She was scared, but she was trying not to show it. A pause, small hands working on a tiny component with surprising precision. She's always trying not to show things so I won't worry. Do you know what Sari did to help you? I asked. Yali nodded. She went and got help. Does it feel strange, I asked, that she asked a stranger, someone she didn't know? Yali considered this. She needed help, she said. You ask for help from where help can come from. She looked up at me for the first time in the conversation, those wide, dark-rimmed eyes very direct. Some people would have said no. He said yes. She looked back down at the model. She found the right person. I wrote the first version of this piece about 3 weeks after the incident. I'm writing this final version 4 months later, and I want to note what has and hasn't changed. What has changed? The Keth community on level 14 has legal residential status. Their ration access is now direct and unmediated by the Vethori distribution monopoly, which is being restructured following the audit. The infrastructure assessment has begun, and while the 90-day window has not yet closed, 11 of the most critical structural and atmospheric concerns have already been addressed, partly because of the formal compliance requirement, and partly because Harmon's Bridge has made 3 runs since the incident, and each time Doria Chan has found a way to include building materials in the allocation that technically nobody asked her to bring, but that Mathen had mentioned in passing once. The school space now has actual educational materials, proper ones, not salvaged catalog pages and hand-drawn charts. Mathen's improvised medical station has been supplemented with equipment that brings it close to the standard of the station's commercial medical facilities. What hasn't changed? The Keth are still a displaced people without a homeworld. The broader galactic structures that produce their situation, the resource extraction agreements, the treaty frameworks that have more enforcement mechanisms for commercial interests than for displaced species welfare, those haven't changed. They won't change from one incident, one filing, one board hearing. That's a larger fight, and I won't pretend otherwise. But 220 people are eating. Yali is building models and arguing with schematics, and doing all the things that a 7-year-old does when she has the energy for it. Sari told me, the last time we spoke, that she wants to study systems administration. She wants to understand how stations work, not just the infrastructure but the governance, the treaty structures, the legal frameworks. If I understand how the systems work, she said, I can use them, like Marcus did. She paused. Or I can fix them, she said, if they need fixing.